Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Roman Skaskiw. This is the third episode where we talk. The last two were focused on the Ukraine crisis, Russian war, whatever you want to call it right now. This one's going to take a very different turn. We're going to talk about the utility of getting an MFA, a Master's of Fine Arts in writing. And Roman is a graduate of the the most prestigious program in the world, which is the Iowa Writers Workshop. And we're just going to talk about, what it's like, how he found it, and other questions that writers might have. So, Roman, let's get started. Why did you decide to apply to the Writers Workshop?
Well, thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure. I applied to Iowa because I seem to have a talent for writing, if I say so myself. It was one of just a few things that I think I'm naturally good at, and I had a great passion for it, and I'd like to try to return to it someday, although life has taken me down a different track. So I applied to it after I got out of the Army the first time in 2004.
And when you applied, what was the application process like? What did you have to submit? And did you apply anywhere else, or was that the only one you applied to?
Like everything in Iowa, it's refreshingly simple. You submitted a certain number of pages. I think in my case, I submitted 2 short stories, one related to my time in Iraq, the other not. And besides that, it was just basic information, and I was accepted there. I think I also applied to Columbia and Cornell, and I think Columbia rejected me and Cornell accepted me, if I remember correctly.
And how did you find the workshop? Look, you came from a military background, which not everyone in the military is right leaning, but the set of personal characteristics that would self-select someone into a military career tend to be have a higher correlation among people with a right-leaning political perspective. And the opposite can be said of kind of the writing community, right? I would say it's overly skewed, kind of a left-wing political perspective. And I imagine Iowa was the same way. So what was that? First of all, is that characterization is that a gross mischaracterization of reality, or did you, is it accurate? And did you experience some of that while you were at Iowa?
I think that characterization is spot on, and maybe that's why I felt like a little bit like an outsider in both places. But for me, they both seemed like pretty natural decisions.
When you say both places, you mean the military and Iowa?
Yeah, the military, especially being a light infantry officer. Like I do not have the personality for that.
No, you don't. I don't either. Actually, it's.
That's not to say I didn't eventually become good at my job, but man, it was a steep learning curve. The 82nd Airborne Division, after just being a nerdy student at the Stanford School of Engineering. And there is that expression that 82nd eats their young. Like you either mature quickly or you get broken. By the end of it, I think I was good, but it was a steep learning curve. Although that's more just like personality traits than political leaning.
Right.
I guess politics was just not that important to me at that point in my life. And same thing in Iowa. I was in Iowa 2005 to 2007. The country was less divided then, so politics were less important. And I could say with confidence that those were 2 of the best years of my life. I loved it there. Iowa, in contrast with other programs, gives you really few responsibilities. You just have to show up to workshop once a week, and you can take other classes if you want, but you don't have to. That's in contrast to like Columbia, where like you have classes and you have homework and you have to read stuff and write essays. So like in Iowa, you're really just a part of a community that cares so much about writing, and it's just incredible. And I think the fact that everyone there just cares so much about writing, like that sort of transcended the any political differences we might have had. Though I'll tell you, I didn't feel them that strongly. Maybe that was a characteristic of 2005 to 2007, or maybe it's something that changed that didn't. It's still there. I don't know.
And when you were in the program, were you kind of on the older side? Like, were there a lot of young people, or was it like all across the spectrum?
Oh, it was definitely all across the spectrum. Yeah, I felt like I was right in the middle. I think I was in my early 30s when I was there. So yeah, I felt like I was in the middle. One thing I did feel strongly about, like, or one strong reaction, given that I had just gotten not just out of the military but home from Iraq. Like you'd see writers get like a little emotional when people criticize their work, and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like there's nobody shooting at me. That's good enough. No, I certainly understand the reactions though. Like it makes for a good joke, but like writers do tend to be more sensitive people, and
Mm-hmm.
more, yeah, and like care a lot, and like I get it how they react as they did, but getting out of the army, like, I couldn't get over like how little I had to worry about.
Yeah, it's also a skill that you have to unlearn, right? Because in the military, it's very direct and it's very quick. Like, you can't
Yeah,
sugarcoat anything, because every second lost increases the probability that a life is lost.
yeah,
So, whereas you get into this kind of corporate environment, you're dealing with something very similar to what we were talking about in the last segment about the way the Russian military apparatus works. Like, you just tell people, there's a culture of telling people what they want to hear, and it can be a rough ride for you if you're a truth speaker. Um, but I imagine Iowa was good for that, in terms of you're working with each other to help improve the writing and things like that. Like, how were you received as a military vet in the program?
well, I think there was one other in the year before me, but we were definitely novelties. I remember even one part they said, "You were in the army? What army?" Was it did you go to Israel to fight in the IDF? And I was like, "No, no, the American army, our army." It was like, "Oh, right." So you were like a little bit of a novelty, and I think a lot of writers are like a lot of talent without a lot of content. So like
Yeah, yeah.
there is a little bit like envy that they, I guess you're perceived as having done something with a lot of gravity, which is probably an accurate perception.
And what like the two short stories that you submitted, were they short stories that you sold before going into Iowa, or were they short stories that you had just written in order to apply to the program?
Yeah, they're just written. I think one after I had been in Iowa, I published both of them in not very well known journals, and one of them is self published as a novella called "A Convoy Home." So if you go to Amazon and you search for my name, Convoy Home, it's one of three novellas that I published. I am not commercially successful, or successful in terms of prestige in any way as far as being a writer goes. So I have not followed up on those my lauded roots as a Iowa alumni.
Does that help? Like, does it matter what the quality of the institution that you went to for an MFA program?
I don't know. Um, I because I mean that there you have to ask somebody who's making decisions about what gets published and what doesn't. There's both resentment and but also like credibility. So it may just depend on who picks up your manuscript, who answers your email, or something like that.
Have you ever tried to apply, or not apply, but send a manuscript to the New Yorker or other, publications that are considered highly prestigious? Paris Review, I think, is another one.
Yeah, and I never get answers. As one of my friends said, there's a reason they call it submission. But
I mean,
and the process is horrible because like you have to wait for like a month or 2 or 3 to get an answer. Some of them insist that while you have a application waiting an answer for them, you don't send it anywhere else. It's like it's hard to believe how bad the process is in our digital age. And yeah, I kind of I do want to get back to writing because I've got a few things to say, and I kind of want to get the landscape of self-publishing or finding a publisher. I don't know what's the better decision. I'm in the software business, so for the last 10 years, I've had different internet startups. I have one now, or moderately successful, doing
Mhm.
blockchain stuff, and I'll be sticking with that for at least a little while longer.
And what sorts of projects do you want to work on when you return to it?
Um, well, the army pulled me back in like right after Iowa. I got pulled off the inactive reserve to go back to Afghanistan for a second time. It was really hard to do because I had had enough, having had 2 deployments before that, and I really didn't believe that we belonged there, and it was just really hard to go back. And I kept great journals while I was there, and like maybe I lack courage. I think Robert Frost said that Robert Frost has a great little talk. It's on YouTube of how important courage is for writers because you can always wait and get more information, or you could always like make things better, but like you need to get out and say things. And I haven't. Like my second deployment into Afghanistan was like 15 years ago, and I kept these great journals. I just haven't sat down and done anything with them. And like the world has moved on. There's a huge war in Ukraine that I just left. I just got my family out. I came back to volunteer. Like the world has changed so many times since I had that experience of having to reluctantly go back to Afghanistan. So I don't know how relevant all of that still is to the world, but I feel like I ought to write some of it down.
Roman, I think right now is probably your best opportunity ever to really make an impact, because not only did you have that lived experience of 3 deployments, right? So two to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq, in one of them in one of the most iconic American units. In fact, there's another alumnus that I interviewed on this, and I interview him all the time. His name's Sean Patrick, who was also an 82nd Airborne alumnus, and he wrote this book, The New Rules for War, and all that good stuff. But you have a very interesting set of experiences, and then you couple that with being from Ukraine, having lived in Ukraine for a decade, and then just watching. You've probably seen its meteoric rise from a former Russian kind of vassal state to this thriving, independent technological hub that's dynamic, et cetera. And now you're having to watch, the Russian orcs, so to speak, kind of marching in and just screwing up, a beautiful story in a beautiful country that has really risen up by its own bootstraps and become a much more dynamic and free society. So there's a lot for you to say at this time in history.
Yeah,
You should definitely take advantage of it.
thank you. I think I will. I think I'll translate my moderate success in business to a lot of free time in the coming years. So I appreciate that. And your characterization of Ukraine just now, I agree with completely. I think what I saw in the last 10 years was the emergence of a Ukrainian middle class, possibly for the first time in its history. So like everywhere there were cool, creative, like so creative and delightful little restaurants popping up. Some of them were hilarious. just like to cater to the more varied taste of a middle class. Everywhere there were recreational centers being built, like an animatronic dinosaur park that my son loved. It's like everywhere there were traffic jams because for the first time in history, Ukrainians could afford cars and everyone was buying cars. So yeah, I'm glad I got to see that. Though it's still like Ukraine, I would need to let it sit for a while and see how it plays out. But one thing that makes it difficult is I have friends and acquaintances whose courage like just puts me to shame. You know, like a guy who, as soon as the conflict started, when it didn't look like Russia was incompetent, like as soon as it started, he just volunteered, and he was the guy whose stuff got destroyed at Yavoriv, you know, or like, so it's kind of embarrassing to it's kind of embarrassing standing adjacent to that kind of heroism, especially since I have a military background.
Yeah, but you didn't have to come back, right? Like you got your family to safety, right? That's your first priority as a husband and father. Like that's what all this is for, right? Like take care of your family first, and that's what you did. But then you came back. You didn't have to come back, you know.
Well, thank you, brother. You'll make a great therapist someday.
No, people don't want me as a therapist because if I start hearing about some like writer who was whining at Iowa about having their manuscripts criticized, they're going to get the horns. They're going to be like, "Are you kidding me? Are you serious? Like, stop whining. Are you like of all the problems you have, you're worried about being criticized? Feedback's a gift. You should be thankful you got feedback. You know, you're lucky somebody didn't just stab you in the back like they do in the real world." So, anyway, I think there's definitely a great opportunity for you in this environment, even if it's just small essays. And at the end of the day, you're already serving, both your country, the United States, and your ancestral homeland, and you can continue to serve by writing, right? Even that has not only its own rewards but its own opportunities to get the message out and to help people who are suffering right now. So anyway, I don't know what else to tell you, but
no, I think that's spot on. So thank you. I do need to attend to my business though. I make sure that I continue to employ the dozen or so folks that I employ. So that's also helping is giving jobs to Ukrainian developers.
Yeah, which like most companies do, right? I can only imagine how they're dealing with. You told me one story offline about a woman you met who was working for a California-based startup, in a bomb shelter. So
yeah. So my wife and I, we left in kind of a hurry and left a bunch of stuff in our apartment. So one of the things I did when I came back to Ukraine was to organize all of our things so that they could be given away in an organized fashion.
And where was that? That apartment was in Kyiv, right?
No, that was in Lviv.
Oh, Lviv. Okay.
Yeah, so much safer. Like there were air raid sirens, but there hadn't been any attacks up to that point. But anyway, I went there and my apartment was occupied. What had been our apartment was occupied by two refugee families. So I got to hear their stories.
But you was that by? Did they just occupy it, or did you?
No. We weren't the owners. We had rented that apartment, and we left early. Like I said, we were planning to leave early. Oh, as it turns out, I have tickets to fly out of Kiev tomorrow. We were planning to fly to the U.S. March 21st. So the landlord, the owner of the apartment, just decided to accept a couple families there.
Okay, with your consent though, like he didn't just.
Yeah, because we had left early and we're planning to leave early even before the war started.
Okay, all right. Well, God bless you, my friend. Stay safe, stay alert, stay alive, and thank you for all you're doing. It's horrible watching all this stuff on TV. So just keep up the good fight, my friend.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you soon.